no need to repeat that. We'll just roll on. And live Zoom is like live TV. So glad to be with you. Good morning, Kentucky and KCCE. It's great to be with KCC this morning to cover a really important topic that kind of dictates how chambers work together at the state and local level. I want to thank Amy for inviting us, and also Ashley Watts. They lead one of the largest, most effective state chambers in America, and they're a positive force to move Kentucky forward. So you should be very proud of your organization. Action, as you know, has increasingly migrated from DC to the states and state capitals. State chambers are playing a larger role in improving competitiveness to meet the challenge of getting their share of economic growth and job creation. Our panel today features three of the most effective, most respected state chamber CEOs in the country from Minnesota, Georgia, and Missouri. Collectively, this panel has over 100 years experience in chamber work. Their keys to effectiveness include their work with local chambers of commerce in their respective states, covering areas including advocacy, political action, product delivery, and economic development. You should also know that all three have been honored nationally by their peers as one of the top state chambers in the country. So let's give you a chance to meet them. And I'll introduce all of them, and then we'll move right into the presentation. Chris Clark. Chris is a native Georgian and serves as CEO of the Georgia Chamber since 2010. Prior to that, he had a significant public sector career serving in various cabinet agencies in state government in Georgia. Doug Loon is CEO of the Minnesota Chamber since 2015. And prior to that, he has nearly 3 decades of experience working in Washington, D.C., at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, at their home office, as well as with members of Congress, serving as one of the top lobbyists for the organization. And most recently, prior to joining the Minnesota Chamber, was head of their grassroots and political operation nationally, working with state and local chambers to increase effectiveness on issues happening at the nation's capital. And finally, Dan Mehan is CEO of the Missouri Chamber. Dan has 20 plus experience working in that organization, about 10 of which as CEO. Again, State Chamber of the Year recognition about 2 years ago. Prior to that, he worked for Washington University in St. Louis and also was on the staff of U.S. Senator Kit Bond. So again, please welcome our panel. And Chris, I'll turn it to you to take us off. Our format today, I think each of our CEOs will talk about what they're doing in their respective states in the areas I've mentioned. There'll be time at the end for Q&A. So Chris Clark from Georgia, welcome, and I'll let you take us away.
Hey, thanks, Lou, and thanks, Ashley and Amy, for having us today. Happy to be with you guys. Let me just give you a little background about our relationships with our local chamber partners here in Georgia. When I came into this job in 2010, there was no relationship between our local chambers and the state chamber. And I was a former local chamber director myself. And so we actually spent 2 years just rebuilding the relationship around the state, talking to all of our partners, visiting with them, trying to understand their needs. And the need from the Georgia Chamber was to have a better grassroots network and to have a better partnership with our local chambers. So after about 2 years, we created the Georgia Chamber Federation, which now has 161 local and binational chambers that are part of that organization. And they have their own council that meets regularly to give us direction for our organization. But really, there's a couple of things that we do with our local chamber partners that I think are absolutely critical. Number one, we created a governmental affairs council within our larger Georgia Chamber Governmental Affairs Council organization, which is about 400 corporate and contract lawyers or lobbyists that meet throughout the session. And so now our local chamber partners have a bi-weekly call during session where they can bring up their local legislation, they can get updates. And our goal is to help our local chamber partners be the most knowledgeable person locally to understand what's happening at the Georgia Capitol. We provide legislative updates and allow them to put their logos on them. We provide federal information, allow them to put their logos on them. It's really just, we treat it almost as a pass-through. Anything we do, put your logo on it, share it with your members, whatever we can do to add value. So that Governmental Affairs Council has been very critical for us. After that was established, our local chambers actually came back and said, hey, we would like, we don't want to get into the endorsement world, but we'd like to be part of your process. And so we actually started adding members, local chamber members to our Political Affairs Council, which does all of our endorsements. This year will actually increase that number significantly. And we made the agreement and decision mutually that if we're going to endorse a state legislative candidate in your community, we're going to reach out and work with you in partnership. That's, it's got to be together. Now, we have had some problems with that. I got one chamber that was picketed because we endorsed someone. They had nothing to do with it, but the local chamber president called me and said, I took it on the chin today because you're doing the right thing. It's unpopular locally, but we support you. And that's the kind of partnership that we really want to facilitate. And then the other thing that we've done in this same governmental affairs arena is we created a program called Chamber Tomorrow, which is basically a little bit of a consulting. We go in and work with local chambers, and we can, do their board orientation. We do tactical planning for them, but we also have developed a presentation that helps their boards understand where they fall on the political engagement realm. Anything from just having a committee that works, that has a set of policies that usually mirror the state chambers, all the way up to having their own PAC. And we've helped a couple of local chambers create PACs in the last few years usually for issue support. And then what we've begun doing in the last couple of years is actually going in with our local chamber partners and running special option sales tax, usually transportation special option sales tax campaigns. We'll actually go in, raise all the money, manage the campaign. We're doing that in 3 metropolitan communities this year alone. So that's kind of the partnership that we have. And I think it's by evidence of the fact that 161 local chambers and binational chambers are part of our effort and continues to grow, I think is a good testament to that. The other thing that I'll add is we did create, based upon their feedback, our own insurance and 401k plan that now you have to be a member of a local or state chamber. And we've heard from numerous state chambers that that's driving significant membership growth for them. And so those programs, we continue to look for those opportunities and are pretty happy with that. The other 2 things that we've done, and then I'll shut up and pass it to Doug. One is we have had a partnership with 2 local chambers to actually run their chambers for them. These were small chambers that couldn't afford insurance, couldn't afford 401k, really good leadership, but just couldn't quite get the traction they needed. So we went in with one chamber, ran it for 2 years. They're now off on their own, doing great. The other chamber, we're still running and helping them day to day. And then the last thing is this year, we're excited. We're going to try revenue sharing with some of our local chambers as well on some events, which we've never done before, but we've got some great partners that really want to give it a shot. So we're looking forward to doing that. So Lou, that's it. I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Hey, thanks so much, Chris. Again, there'll be time, I think, when the panel's done to ask questions. So feel free to hold those. And panel will be glad to give you additional perspective. Want to now turn to our colleague in Minnesota, Doug Loon. Doug is CEO of the Minnesota Chamber. So Doug, good to have you with us, and take it away.
Thank you, Lou. And it's great to be with all of you in Kentucky. I think what you're going to hear today from the 3 of us are some similarities and some differences. And I think the differences many times are going to be around how we're reacting to our own marketplace. I would say each state is unique in its structure, certainly its political structure. We here in Minnesota have the only divided legislature in the country, where we have the Republicans controlling the Senate and the Democratic Party, called the DFL Party, controlling the House, with the governor being held by the DFL Party. That means we have to be even more assertive and collectively sharing an agenda so we can be successful in making incremental progress on the things we're trying to get done to make Minnesota a more favorable place to be in business. So that relationship with the local chambers is absolutely essential. But before I get into that, let me back up to speak to how we're structured here in Minnesota and the relationship that has been fostered well before my time of joining the Minnesota Chamber, that relationship between the state chamber and local chambers. As Chris mentioned, when he came in 2010 to the Georgia Chamber, the relationship wasn't strong. Here in Minnesota, I would say it was very different. My predecessor, David Olson, came out of the local chamber business, a local chamber community after running, I think, 3 local chambers, or working in 3 local chambers, running 2. So his commitment to the local chamber network was evident day one. I came out of, converse to that, I came out of the national chamber world. So in a way, we share this deep appreciation for the chamber brand. And when I go out and give speeches to local chambers, I start off with, we share a common mission and a common purpose and a common brand. And then from there, everything is unique, right? Every chamber is unique in its structure, and we're unique at the Minnesota Chamber in that relationship. But we know this, that relationship with local chambers is in the Minnesota Chamber's DNA. But for all the reasons I just described, plus we have, latest count, 3 senior level staffers at the Minnesota Chamber that came out of the local chamber community that gives us that extra connection and insight into the interests of the local chambers. We also manage the state CCE, the Minnesota Chamber Execs Association, which is, we have a contractual arrangement with them to manage it, but we do more than just manage it. We give it guidance, we offer our leadership to it. And because of that, the relationships are generally very positive. Not every chamber in the state participates in MCCE. And with the work of the Minnesota Chamber, we wish that were the case, 100% participation. But again, that's a relationship that is always on our mind and seeking to be strengthened, because we know we can't get the reach without the support of the local chambers and other trade associations in Minnesota. In addition to running MCCE and doing the conferences and providing support on leadership development and organizational development for local chambers, we also run a program similar to Chris's. We call it the Minnesota Chamber Federation Program. It is I think a unique structure in that it's an opt-in type entity driven around shared policy agenda items. Each year, much like other state chambers that are deeply involved in policy, we manage somewhere between 30 and 50 issues at the Capitol each year. From those, we pick kind of the big ones and then take them to these local chambers who opt in to a shared or collective strategy around a set number of issues. Typically, each session, it's around 4 to 5, maybe 6 issues. They provide us input on how they want to view those issues. They collectively pick those issues. They take those issues back to their committees, their board, for approval, so that when they come as part of this chamber federation, it's a turnkey type deal that we can then use their brand, use their names at the Capitol as demonstrating deep grassroots support. Why is that important? Well, our membership is made up of large companies as well as small companies. About 70% are below 100 employees, but still we miss within our membership that kind of Main Street Minnesota feel to our membership profile. With the local chambers, they bring that to the Capitol, that Main Street voice, which is in a divided legislature, absolutely crucial in how we get our message across to elected officials. Elected officials appreciate the big companies, but they're more empathetic or sympathetic to the voices of Main Street businesses. So with that collective voice through our chamber federation, by the way, we vary between 40 and 50 chambers per session joining into that shared effort. So that's a collective effort around a shared set of issues, but it's also the chambers we give our most attention to. So we treat them with all the effort that they deserve. We give them, bring them to several sessions a year. We bring in special speakers for them. We wine and dine them a bit. So we give them a little bit more of a concierge service, if you will, on behalf of the Minnesota Chamber for their extra work in helping us be successful and helping them be successful. The other thing that I'll say that we put an extra emphasis on is when we have a success at the Capitol, and believe it or not, it was really hard for us to get non-taxable treatment of PPP loans because we're a conforming state to the federal tax code. That should have been easy to do in Minnesota, but with our divided legislature, it was hard. And it was a big victory for us to get it done. And that was a shared victory with the Federation. So as we went around and spoke about the importance of how we got that done, we shared that victory, celebrated that victory with the local chambers that participated in the grassroots effort to make sure that that got done here in Minnesota, and Minnesota businesses were not taxed on their PPP loans that were forgiven. So that's our kind of policy work. On the political side, much like Chris, we really lean on our local chambers to help give us not just the guidance on how we endorse and who we provide resources to in support of their campaigns, both candidates that are seeking re-election and those that are seeking election for the first time. They also help us a lot in recruiting candidates. No better person on the town than a engaged chamber executive or their staff who see the political landscape and see the potential candidates and helping us recruit them. And then when we look at the full landscape, then they help vet those and give us guidance on our endorsements. And our PAC board that leads that effort on endorsements and our PAC support for candidates not just appreciates, but leans on their, what we refer to many times as the quiet counsel coming from local chambers. We're not asking them to put their brand on candidates necessarily. If they do, that's great. And we make sure that we don't have competing interests in that space. But we work really hard to make sure that we're on the same page with local chambers, and our political work and our engagement with them is really important to our process and important to our board of our PAC board, as I mentioned. Let me just mention lastly is our Grow Minnesota program. This is part of our service programs at the Minnesota Chamber. This is our business retention, economic development strategy. It's done in partnership with 65 chambers across the state. We go out and do hundreds of visits per year, sit-down meetings with businesses to understand what's on their mind, help them solve their problems, and then collectively, we gather great intelligence on the issues that are facing businesses through those hundreds of visits per year. And that's done with and in partnership with local chambers and a handful of economic development authorities if we don't have an active chamber in that area. So it's a great tool. We've had that program 15 plus years, and it has served this chamber very well to keep us not just connected to businesses on Main Street and around the state, but also to keep us well apprised of the issues and the challenges that they're facing in the state. And that enables us to, again, solve problems for them on a macro basis and on a one-on-one basis. So I'll stop there and just thank you again for being with me. I look forward to the questions, Lou.
Hey, thanks so much, Doug. Great overview from Minnesota. Again, if you aren't getting your questions ready, please get ready to do so, because I think we're going to have plenty of time for questions. Our next panelist is from Missouri. Dan Mehan is joining us by phone. Dan is the CEO of the Missouri Chamber. And Dan, I'll let you take it away. Tell us about your state and how you're working with local chambers.
Thank you, Lou. And good morning to everyone in Kentucky and my other two colleagues in Georgia and Minnesota. A lot of similarities with what Chris and Doug described, but I'll tell you a story about how we really capitalized on this. I've always described the relationship of the state chamber and the local chamber network as we're in the same clan, but we're cousins. Local chambers take care of Main Street and their communities. We try to lobby for the best business climate in the state of Missouri, and put it very, very simply. So we've always had a relationship with the local chambers. We amped that up when we started what we call Missouri 2030 6 years ago, which is our strategic plan that we knew that Missouri was lagging in a lot of economic indicators, and we invested a lot of time and treasure to get the data right. And we realized that Missouri was 42nd in job creation, 43rd in state GDP growth, and 39th in per capita income growth. We also contracted with Gallup to do a one-on-one survey with at least 1,000 CEOs across the state, and the kind of a strengths and weaknesses analysis of doing business in Missouri. So we got the data right, and it was with the metrics we had, It was bulletproof evidence that we needed to do something. But we took it one step further, and we went to that network, the Missouri local chambers of commerce, and we started what we call the Missouri Chamber Federation, much like my two colleagues have described. And I expected, we get the 20 usual suspects that would participate with us, and we sent the information out and said, here's what we found, here's the real score on how we're doing, but what are we missing? What do we need to add? Can you farm this out to your members and let us know what they feel about it? And again, expecting about 20 to respond, which would have been really, really good. We now have 175 local chambers in this, and that network is powerful, including, you all will realize this, that you've got Louisville and Kentucky, and you've got small towns, you've got Paducah elsewhere. So we've got St. Louis and Kansas City, and then it drops off from there into lower population centers. But we've got all of them in this federation, and all of them pretty much signed up for 2030 and the priorities there. We also pay great attention to them and have the local chambers get together every August and set their our legislative priorities. The Missouri Chamber might have a couple other ones that are member driven, but we do lean on the local chambers to come up with a priority list. We were, I think, the last state that has a sales tax to do the Wayfair provision, and that was obviously very important for them, for local chambers in particular. So the legislative effort, we could do more with the legislative effort, but what I've found is, and I think Chris and Doug might have alluded to it, sometimes local chambers are a little reticent to do endorsements or engage in the political arena the way we do. That's why we have a PAC. That's why we have a political operation. I'll mention another thing that we have utilized. We came out with a MIWA, like Chris has, I think, in Georgia, multiple employer welfare arrangement, and it's a health insurance program for small business, 2 to 50-man groups. And we marketed that through the local chambers, and it has provided a wonderful retention tool for them because, like Chris said, I think the business has to be a member of a chamber in the Missouri Chamber Federation or the Missouri Chamber itself. We don't use it as a membership tool. We encourage those companies to join their local chamber. But the MIWA has grown to the point where we have 33,000 lives covered by it and closing in on 3,000 groups. And that's proved extremely successful for us. And we are also exploring and have implemented some revenue sharing programs with our seminar program that we're finally getting back out on the road, which is why you can't see my face built for radio this morning, but with local chambers helping to promote the various conferences that we do on a variety of issues, and there's a little bit of a revenue sharing that goes on with that. So with that, I'll stop. But this chamber federation that we have in Missouri has grown beyond our wildest expectations. And we did something smart a few years ago, and we hired a local chamber person from the Warrensburg Chamber of Commerce to run it. So it was, she knows the dynamic of a local chamber and has done a fantastic job in growing it and building that confidence, that trust that we have throughout the state of Missouri. So Lou, I'll stop at that and happy to take questions.
Wonderful. Well, the floor is open for questions. Feel free to either raise your hand or come to a mic or put it in the chat function. Again, I might just sort of kick us off and maybe maybe turn it to Chris. Can you maybe point to an example in Georgia where were it not for the great partnership you have with local chambers, fill in the blank, this issue just couldn't have been accomplished. And how'd you do it and how'd that work?
Absolutely, Lou. And I think it's one that matters to Ashley and to the local Kentucky chambers too, and this issue of infrastructure investment. And so we actually created an affiliate just to focus on transportation. And in 2014, we had a statewide referendum. It was a set of regional referendums on investments in transportation. And almost every local chamber in Georgia signed on, supported passage of it, held meetings for us, had us on media. I think I did 512 interviews that year. But the effective ones were where the local chamber president was sitting with me on the radio or on TV or in front of the Rotary clubs selling that message. And so we were able to pass those regional referendums in several parts of the state to the tune of about $1.8 billion. Those chambers and the ones where we didn't pass came back together a year later and said, we've got to have a better plan. This was good. It's not perfect. Where do we go from here? And so we listened to the local chambers. And within 2 years, we had passed another bill that allowed local chambers to pass T-SPLOST on their own without being part of a region. And then 2, we actually passed a statewide funding mechanism to the tune of another $1.5 billion. Through those processes, the local chambers came back to us that wanted to pass a local T-SPLOST. We ran those campaigns. They facilitated them. In 1 or 2 communities, we actually helped them set up their own PAC so that they could pass and raise the money and make a little money too on those campaigns. And so absolutely, I think we're getting poised to have this discussion again for another round of funding for transportation and logistics. And we've been having our meetings with local chamber presidents. Our transportation guys have been meeting literally almost daily with a local chamber. And our local chambers have said transportation is part of what we're going to support, just like local education. And so, yeah, without that partnership, we'd be $2.5 to $3 billion behind, not counting all the local investments that we've made over the last couple of years. So absolutely, it's made a difference.
Very helpful. I know, Doug, you pointed to the PPP tax issue, which is a great win. Maybe just turn to Dan in Missouri. Dan, is there an issue you can think of, like Chris and Doug have described, that, were it not for your, unique partnership, in your case, with 175 local chambers, this issue would have been more difficult to accomplish?
Like Chris in Georgia, transportation. We have achieved our first funding increase for roads and bridges since 1993. And Missouri has the 7th longest highway system in the country, woefully underfunded. And we pretty much ran a mini campaign to get this done legislatively. And we, here's the other thing for local chambers to think about. We copied it from South Carolina. So don't hide your eyes, plagiarize. If somebody's got a good idea. But we networked this out to the Federation, and we're just pushing it like it barely passed, but we finally got it done. So that it's that infrastructure, it's those basics that you can get collaboration on, and it pretty much workforce and infrastructure. If you can focus on those things, it is what everyone wants. Every one of our members is crying out for, we need people. I've got the jobs, I can't fill them, I can't retain them. And it's the same thing for probably all of you. And so if you can coordinate a workforce program like what we have with apprenticeships going on in Missouri right now, we're number 2 in the nation behind California on an apprenticeship program that we do for IT. And that success breeds success. So you go to where the hurt is, and it's right now it's in workforce and infrastructure. But Lou, that's the example that I'd use. Everybody was wanting to increase funding for roads and bridges. It didn't happen. I mean, nobody had an iPhone when the last one was done. So it was that long ago. And that network proved extremely valuable for that campaign.
Great, that's helpful. Maybe just kind of turn to another topic. I know there's about, gosh, at least 15 state chambers in America, including the ones on this call today, that have some kind of a long-term vision to create economic prosperity and economic growth in their states. And again, I think that's an evolution that, 10 years ago that didn't exist, but today, because the actions in the states, state chambers with their local chamber partners are busy leading and shaping and driving that kind of plan for the future. I wonder if each of you might kind of talk about, I know, Dan, you sort of teed up your Vision 2030, but I know Doug and, Chris, you have a similar projects. Talk about how local chambers have been part of your coalition to advance the kind of prosperous economic growth future for your states and get legislators on board thinking bigger about what's potential in your states.
I'll jump in here. It's Dan from Missouri. Happy to be talking to our neighbors in Kentucky. I was just very, very close to Sykeston and Cape Girardeau, and I gave an update on Missouri 2030. And I mentioned the numbers that we started with: 42 in job creation, 43 state GDP, 39th in per capita income growth. Those have gone to 22 in job creation, 34 in state GDP, and 36 in per capita income growth. We used those numbers to start with 6 years ago, a 10-year trend from the U.S. Department of Labor. And then we were able to look at the 5-year trend and cite the improvement that we've had. Is it all 2030? No. But is it a huge factor in it? Yes. And the fact that we have that team of all the local chambers, that now it's not just, hey, this is 2030, here's what we're thinking about, what do you think of it? It's, here's 2030, thanks for your help, here's what we've accomplished, and here's where we're going. And there's a sense of momentum, and there's something else that if the business community via the local chamber network, the federation, whatever you want to call it, that is the vehicle to unite the business community. And in Missouri, we've had 3 governors in 6 years. There's been a little turmoil here. There's going to be more. But the constant is Missouri 2030 and the fact that we're all in this together, and here's the plan. So when the newbies come into the legislature or the governor's office, you can say, here's what we've done. Here are our very real markers of progress. And it gives you credibility and gives the business community that voice that we absolutely need to have in a united way.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Doug, do you want to jump in and kind of give your perspective on this, please?
Sure. First of all, when I arrived here, we had just started a review looking backwards at our state. So each year over the past 6 years, we've done what we call our Minnesota Business Benchmarks report that lays out in wonderful graphics Minnesota's strengths and weaknesses looking backwards. So how do we rank relative to other states on infrastructure investment or workforce or cost of healthcare, cost of work comp, all the things that add up to what I refer to as the 6 pillars of our state's economy. And then we measure those with the latest, most credible data points so that we can understand how we're doing. And we're getting worse, or we're getting better. So we give ourselves a grade on those. But what was missing from that discussion, because that did a nice job of telling us where we have been, not very good on where we're headed as a state. And so when we redesigned our Minnesota Chamber Foundation, we realized that we needed to have we need to address a missing ingredient, which is having a thought center, an ability to do analysis and have a deeper understanding of our state's private sector economy. And I use those words frequently, by the way, because the private sector is what we stand for. And there's a government in Minnesota is huge, nonprofits are massive, and they're all not focused on the private sector. They're focused on a whole bunch of other stuff. So this is all about how do we make sure the private sector is looking after itself going forward? And so we rolled out a very extensive report called Minnesota 2030. I encourage you to go to our website under Foundation, you can find it. We did a number of things with it, but the benchmark purpose was the building a better body of knowledge inside the Minnesota Chamber in partnership with our local chambers and other trade associations, so that we knew where we've been, but also where we're going. Much like what Dan was just saying about their project down in Missouri. It also included an economic forecast, as well as a series of recommendations to address some of the challenges. But it also did a really nice job outlining the strengths of the private sector economy in Minnesota. We're very lucky to have, for the size of our state, which is roughly 6 million population, we have 16 Fortune 500 companies and 24 Fortune 1000 companies. And the unique feature of those is that they all started in Minnesota and grew here, and took on different forms. But along the way, there was that one common denominator, is that they started and grew here in Minnesota. And it's not just in the metro of the Twin Cities; it's companies all around the state, like Hormel and General Mills had original sightings, and 3M. Yep, some of those are in the metro, but they have strong footings in greater Minnesota, and the manufacturing side of that is a key driver. So we put a spotlight on that, and what we found out along the way is that this had not been done in Minnesota in over 30 years, and it was missing. The University of Minnesota did some of this work. The Fed, Minneapolis Fed, did some of this work. The Department of Employment and Economic Development did a little bit, but nobody did it on behalf of the private sector in partnership with local chambers and trade associations to give us that firm look. So now we know how we're going to build on our strengths, how we're going to address some of our challenges. And some of those challenges are those that historically have been our strengths. And Dan talked about this. It's a number one challenge is workforce. We have, like the rest of the country, an aging demographic. We're not importing talent as fast as we once were. The talent that we are bringing in, by the way, come from the immigrant community. And so we did a follow-up report on the value and the economic contributions of the immigrant community in Minnesota. And I tell you, that thing got more attention than really our Minnesota 2030 report on the day it was rolled out. We got a lot of applause for it. It helps us with our narrative at the Capitol, as well as we talk about making sure that we are a welcoming state for immigrants, that we're welcoming our growing diverse population in Minnesota. And that has led us to a whole series of other activities in partnership with local chambers around D&I, around workforce programs, and then collectively through our federation, how do we make sure we protect Minnesota's vibrant economy and make sure that we're reaching our true GDP potential? Because we know going into the pandemic, we weren't reaching our potential, and we'd like to come out of the pandemic with our 2030 set of recommendations and partnerships with local chambers to make sure we reach and exceed our state's economic potential going forward. So it was a galvanizing moment when we produced these reports, and they have a lasting effect. And I think the takeaway for us is, what do we do with it now, right? How do we execute on the plan? But my hope is to go deeper into some of the understandings of some of our challenges, so that we do follow-up reports and follow-up levels of activity that will certainly include the local chambers. I'll just mention one in particular, then I'll stop. We found that we are, as I mentioned earlier, one of our greatest assets is building companies and making them great. That's because they start here in Minnesota, but our business startup rate and entrepreneurship has dropped way off, and we don't really understand why. And we need to get a better, firmer understanding of why, and then develop a strategy around that. So my new board chair who's coming in this fall, one of his 3 priorities is better understanding of business startups and entrepreneurship in Minnesota, and what can we do collectively as a state business community to foster that sense of entrepreneurship once again in Minnesota.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Doug. I know, Chris, you've been at this for quite a while. Love to have your perspective on how your plan for the future of Georgia is kind of taking hold, and how you're involving local chambers.
Sure. So I'll do this quick in case there are any other questions that are out there. So we've used the same format now this is going into our 12th year. We rebrand it and rename it about every 4 years. And this year it's the New Georgia Economy. We've done that for the last 3 years, and that's our vehicle. But the format's the same. Much like Doug, our foundation is focused on future, where we're going, what the issues are. We used to look 10 years out. This year, we're now going into communities and talking about 10, 20, 30, all the way out to 2050. And so how we do it, and we do this we use the same format about every 4 years. We'll go in, we'll do a presentation that shows, here's where the state's going. Here's the future outlook in several different sectors, what the demographics show. We try to have local data and information that we pull from census or from other areas that most local communities don't really know where they're going. So we give them that data. And then we spend the other half of the program in a live Q&A session with a live poll. We use a company called pollev.com. I just did one yesterday for, 20 different mayors and their staffs. And we'll go through, we basically say, we're going to make you futurist and deputize you. You know the data now. Tell us where you think the state's going on economy, on mobility, on economic prosperity, on DE&I. And we make them look 10 years out, talk about it, answer about 25 questions. And then all that data is pulled together that we use with the General Assembly with our own strategies. But the great piece is we give back to the communities. Here's what your local leadership said about these issues. I did one last week. I did a tour through South Georgia, and I did one community. We were standing room only in this chamber, probably had 200 people show up. And the chamber president, it was her first big post-COVID event. And afterwards, she said, this just defined who our local chamber is, because now they see we can focus on the future of our community and how we fit into the big picture, and that their voices count. And so it's so effective for us. It's led to literally several hundred bills that we've had passed in the last few years, just because we've got the data to back it up. And then we obviously poll those same questions as well. But that's becoming, we used to do it every 4 years. We're going to continue it into 22. It's probably going to be part of our DNA forever, because people want to be heard. Your local members, you have events for them. You could use this tool just to get their feedback on 5 issues per meeting. And it makes them feel heard and makes them think about things they're not thinking about as they try to run their day-to-day operations. So that's our focus. Give them the data. We look way far out now. We're projecting e-commerce. We're projecting electric vehicle usage, all that stuff. And then coming back and saying, what do you think about it? How can you help us? How can we help you? And it's just very effective. So it's a complete, total partnership with chambers, local chambers, as well as other business associations and city and county governments as well.
Yeah, that's really great, Chris. Again, I think it's one example of how chamber work has changed fundamentally over the last probably decade and a half. I think most of us recall a day where advocacy was the whole ball game. Most of it was playing defense. And now increasingly state chambers like the ones on this call and Kentucky are being called on to bring forward the best ideas, solutions to your state's biggest problems. And in many cases, it's sharing this kind of data that this panel has talked about that typically doesn't feel like Chamber of Commerce good news data. In many cases, it kind of surfaces, here's stuff we got to work on. And I think the other thing it sort of recognizes is being able to feed the legislature with some of the best ideas potentially puts these collective states and your state in the best position to make the kind of impact you desire. So really exciting to see what's happening, not just in these 3 states, but really across the country when it comes to these kind of issues. If there's no questions yet, I know, Amy, you're busy working the room to find them. Let me just jump to another topic. I know talking about how chambers have evolved. I think forever, state chambers have been involved in politics. And I know increasingly that's been, not always easy to do at the local level, because local chambers live with, local businesses, their local political leaders. I'd be interested maybe in having each of you talk about how you're helping local chambers get more involved in politics and political activities. And again, tapping into their intelligence and insight, but maybe, giving them some cover so they don't have a tough time at home. But increasingly, I think what this panel is seeing is to be effective, moving the needle at the state level, advocacy matters, grassroots is important, having a plan for the future like Vision 2030 is critical, but it's hard to do if we're not electing the right people to really embrace your vision. So I'll just kind of open the floor to the panel and maybe talk about some of your work with local chambers to get them more into political action and political activity.
Well, Lou, I'll kick it off with, I'll just say this from the person that did Dan did as well, national work, from the national scale as you get it into state and you go into local. I think in every case, it's harder as you get closer, right? You can sit in Washington and talk about the political landscape that exists out in the districts, and then you can come to Minnesota and talk about the political landscape that goes into each individual legislative district. But when you get close and these elected officials are at your meetings, you're at the Rotary, you see them in the grocery store, it becomes a bit more treacherous. So we first of all, let me also say we're seeing significant turnover of some of our I'll call seasoned chamber executives, mostly because of retirement, some because of movement that's happening in the marketplace, some that was put off because of COVID. And so we're going through this right now of kind of re-educating, if you will, around the political advocacy engagement side. And I firmly believe that it needs to start with advocacy, meaning being involved in issues, whether they be local or state or federal, even when they pop up at the local chamber level. Once there is a kind of an appreciation and the value proposition around being engaged in issues that matter to your members on their collective behalf, then you start to realize how important it is to be electing individuals that have some understanding of business, some experience in business, or at a minimum appreciation for the work of private employers, large and small. And that starts with a political engagement. And so what we start with and what we make available to them is our scorecard. Then they can see in black and white how are their legislators performing. And we try to keep them abreast of local chambers of when the issues are coming up, when the votes are occurring. Here's how your members voted, but also having their input on how they should be voting is really critical to that. And so the next step after being involved in advocacy many times is in engaging in the landscape of the elections. Many local chambers do involve themselves in local elections like school board, city council, mayor races. We seek their advice and input, and if they can, also support our candidates at the state level. But most importantly, we want their counsel and their advice on both, as I said earlier, recruitment as well as our endorsements. And their input to that is really critical, so we don't find ourselves on opposite sides of where we land in those races. But we see it as critical to our ability to have impact. And as I like to say, we got to have a little bite with our bark, meaning when we go up to the Capitol, we can bark a lot, but we got to have some bite, and the bite is through the political process.
So Lou, this is Chris. Let me jump in because I'm gonna have to get off in a couple minutes for another Zoom. But much like Doug, we work, we give cover, we try to partner. But I ran a local chamber, and early in my career, and I got involved in two political issues. The first one I won, and I was the biggest deal in that little town. So they put me in charge of another political campaign that lost by 70 votes. And the newspaper, I'll never forget it, I've got it somewhere around here. They had a cartoon of basically an Old West saloon doors and two big burly hands throwing me out through the door, dressed as a cowboy, essentially saying that I was getting kicked out of town because we failed. And so I'm highly sensitive to how the local politics work. And we don't ask local chambers. I think as long as I've been here, I've only had two local chambers actually endorse a candidate with us. We don't ask them to do that, but we coordinate with them. We bring them along. We partner with them. And more lately, what we've done is find those issues that impact multiple communities, bring them together. We've had that with some LGBTQ issues here lately. Get everybody connected and let them work and support them and provide the backup for them. And then obviously we've got the scorecard. We plug them on the political affairs. They know everything that we're doing. Nothing's kept secret from them, but we're not going to push them and ask them to go too far out. Now we will on issues like a T-SPLOST or an E-SPLOST campaign or a state issue that's going through, but not politically. So we try to find that balance.
Very, very similar in Missouri to what Chris just described. It's tough to get local chambers out on that political limb, and we just don't go there. And we have a political operation, like I mentioned before. Doug cited his scorecard. We have our ratings, and when you're honest about the issues and You've developed that trust. We rate on workforce issues, the transportation gas tax increase, and these other things that, if you look at where the state chamber typically comes down, it's center right on the political spectrum, but realistic, like Chris cited the LGBT issues. You got to do the right thing for your state's economy. And so sometimes that alienates the far right or the far left. And frankly, that's tough. Tough on them, and that's just where we have to be. The one thing I'd say, because Doug and Chris did a great job describing this, and at the peril of giving Ashley a little more work, lean on your state chamber for this information. This is what we do. We specialize in issues in more and more, as I've seen and we've done in Missouri, mining the data, getting the facts right, getting the trends right, so you can position your state in a way that, regardless of the political storm that's going to come, and it will come to everyone at one point or another, you've got a plan, you've got the way forward that you can share with them. So with your legislators. So lean on your state chamber for that information that will make you that much more valuable in your community.
There we go. Thanks a lot, Dan. That's a great perspective on politics. I think most people in the room would probably think about politics almost as a third rail issue in local communities. But again, I think from the vantage point of the leaders on the phone today, and certainly my career, it's hard to lobby legislators who you elect that just don't get business. So, in fact, over my career, I can't hire enough lobbyists to change people's minds that just don't care. So I think the focus on politics is certainly increasingly part of state chamber work. And I'd agree with Dan, leaning on your state chamber to provide that kind of intel and guidance is certainly very critical. And I think early on, the voting record issue does sort of surface. I've seen it before, when legislators come back home in your communities, they have the I Heart Business sticker on their car and I'm on your team. But then when Doug or Chris publish their voting record, it's kind of like, well, wait a minute. It doesn't look like we're all on the same page. So the voting record is a great tool to kind of keep people honest and, kind of keep people on the same page with things that you find important. So I think we've kind of come to the end of our discussion. And again, what a great group of people to learn from. Amy, thanks again for inviting us. I think some of our panel has to jump. I want to thank Chris Clark from Georgia, Doug Loon from Minnesota, and Dan Mehan from Missouri. I think you've heard a good perspective of what top leaders around the country, including yours in Kentucky, Ashley Watts, how they view the importance of advocacy, politics, economic development, products, and also having a compelling long-term future for the vision of your state. And I think it's certainly exciting times ahead for chambers. I think exciting times ahead for state organizations that are really driving and leading the big change. In fact, what I'm finding around the country is organizations like you have on the phone, on the Zoom call today, are really seen as change agents, shaping and driving and leading the respective futures of their states. So I think the business community is well served by having strong state chambers. And certainly the group we've assembled today is the best of the best. Wish you all great success in the coming year and your endeavors in Kentucky. And thanks for making this panel part of your discussion today. Hope the rest of your conference is a big success. And Amy and Ashley, wish you all the best. Thanks so much.
Hey, Lou, can I add one more thing in?
Yep, go right ahead. Right ahead.
This is Dan in Missouri. Our COO is a proud University of Missouri graduate. And as a result of the SEC battle between the Wildcats on the gridiron, he has to wear.
To bring that up.
He he has to wear a Kentucky shirt every Friday during football season. So you got us this year.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I appreciate it, you guys. This has meant a lot to us for you all taking time. We are certainly proud of our state chamber and know you all are leading your all's well. And we appreciate you taking time to share your insights with us. I don't know if you can hear the crowd clap, but they're going to clap for you now.
Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I will let you guys go. And Lou, I'm sure we will talk again soon. Thanks you all.
We're good. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Bye.